Now, Barbara, I'm going to give you the decision. I know you get to make an opening statement as well, but you might want to just jump in and start talking about the things that Bruce has.
But I think you hit the nail on the head around the assessments. And I think that we still see, as in No Child Left Behind, a primacy given to reading and mathematics. And as important as they are, we need to have science on the same level with reading and mathematics, I would say. And the U.S. Department of Education invested $500 million in 2 state consortia that are developing assessments to go with those common reading and mathematics standards. And there's no comparable investment being made in new science assessments. And I think that's really a place where some political action on the part of people who are talking to policymakers is really in order at this point, because if there are not good science assessments that really stress these practices, I think we're going to revert to the same old teaching definitions and teaching formulas.
Well, to that point, I mean, we have to understand that everyone keeps saying, well, we know innovation drives our economy. Innovation does that. That's how the economy grows. And they're usually talking about technology. Well, technology is a product of science and engineering with a commonality of math. So anything you do that's a 3-legged stool, if you don't develop all 3 legs, it's going to fall over.
It's going to fall over.
You know,
That's right.
Is it because in general in Washington or at the state level, we don't understand that intrinsic, integral connection?
I think it's a lack of understanding of that connection, but I also think that there's a couple of ingrained ideas that really have hurt education in the United States for decades. One of them is the notion that you have to start with the simple things, you start with the most basics, and you don't do anything else until you've done the basics. And so you'll hear people say, reading is basic, reading first. And what it means is until a student shows competency on reading tests, they actually don't get to have any science. But if you watch young children out in the world and you see them exploring things, you see them looking at seeds, you see them asking questions. They're asking why the sky is blue at the age of 2. But we decide in our education system that's too conceptual. And until they can pass a test on reading comprehension at the 3rd grade level, we are not going to give them any concepts. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not too much. I think that's deeply ingrained in the public perception of education, that you start with the basics, you don't go beyond the basics until they're mastered. And this has particularly been the philosophy behind education for poor children. And a lot of those poor children who have trouble with the multiple choice tests in reading and math, consequently, never get to do the fun part of math, the fun part of reading, or science or social studies, because they're still struggling over underlining the parts of speech in a given sentence. And I think that's really hurt education.
Let's have your opening issues, your opening remarks.
Well, first I wanted to thank you for pulling this together and being here tonight, Moira. It's wonderful, and getting to talk with you, Bruce. You've really been one of my heroes for what you've done in science education and the science education standards. You have articulated, I think, the issues, and you've given us a vision, and unfortunately we haven't had the political will or the systems to make that happen, but I think we have to continue to work on that. There is strong public perception of how important science, technology, engineering, and math is. People are aware of how connected that is to our economic productivity. And I was struck, there was a survey recently in California, survey nationwide, asking people how important is science education. And 90% of people say it's extremely important. And there was another survey Microsoft commissioned of parents, and they asked them what careers they would most like their children to go into. And science and engineering were the top 2 careers. So people in this country think that it's really important. And you'd think that that would translate into political will for a strong science education system, and that we would put the resources in place to do that, to have the educational opportunities for all of our students. And yet somehow it's not happening in this country. And if you've looked at the new book, Tom Friedman and co-author, That Used to Be Us, and he talks about the energy we had around science education and having some of the best inquiry-oriented science curricula in the Sputnik era. And now he doesn't see that, and he talks about other countries where they do not only see that connection between STEM education and economic opportunity, but they're actually acting on it. And it's pretty scary if you start to look at any of these statistics. About a third of our college graduates have a degree in some kind of science, technology, engineering, or math. But you compare that with China is 53% and Japan is over 60%. They're obviously doing a lot more than we are doing. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago with Charles Vest, the president of the National Academy of Engineering, and he was talking about the statistics for engineering. Fewer than 5% of our undergraduate degrees are in engineering. And you compare that with other countries. Again, it's about 13% in Europe, and it's something on the order of 30% when you go to Asia. So our students are not going into these fields. And one of the things I wanted to bring out was we have a crisis not just in the quality of our science education, not just in what people usually look at, which is the number of degrees produced, and also the test scores, how we're really mediocre when you look at international assessments of science and mathematics. We're in the middle for developed countries, and nowhere close to the top. But it's not just that our kids aren't achieving in these areas, it's that they're not interested. And I think they're not interested because of the way science is being taught or not taught. There have been studies of people that do go into a STEM profession and get a degree, and most of them were hooked by middle school. And we also know that a very large proportion of our kids have decided that science and math are not for them by middle school. They don't even know what engineering is, but science and math are not for them. They believe they can't do it. They believe they're not capable, and they will avoid it as much as they possibly can. And I think that tells us we need to have strong science education at the elementary level that's not only good scientifically, but that inspires that interest in people and inspires a sense of their capability to reason like a scientist and to think like a mathematician. And unfortunately, because of the accountability system you talked about, Bruce, it's just not happening. These teachers are in places where they may lose their jobs, their school might get reconstituted if scores on the math and science multiple choice tests aren't high enough. There was a recent study the Lawrence Hall of Science and some of my SRI colleagues did in elementary schools in California. And 80% of the elementary school teachers said they don't have enough time to teach science because they have to spend their time on math and reading. 80%. And when they looked at the quality of the science education that was being offered, you know, a lot of it really wasn't very good or wasn't very inspiring. We're doing a study now. We're looking at science offerings in the after-school programs that California has for low-income schools serving low-income kids. And I don't know whether to laugh or cry in a lot of the places we go to, and we are only going to places that do science after school, which not a lot do. And when we go there, a number of them are using textbooks and kits in the after-school science that were bought for school day science, but they say, well, they're not being used anymore during the day, so we're using them after school.